Hello, everybody, and welcome to Microsoft's webinar series. We have a very popular and compelling topic for you today: innovative capital budgeting and corporate planning in Project Online. My name is Mike Otranto, and I'm a strategic account specialist at Microsoft. I'm also joined on today's webcast with Scott Daly, who leads as a senior account executive and a PPM specialist, and Matt Willey, our product guru. The line will not be open for questions, but feel free to use the chat feature. Any question we don't get to, we will respond to via email, and we'll be including our contact information at the end of the webinar. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away, no need to worry. I will be emailing the recording and the slide deck of today's presentation. I will now hand it off to Scott Daly. Scott?
All right, thanks, Mike, and thank everybody for joining. We're going to start out with some slides, but not a ton. We're not going to slide you to death. We will get to a demo of everything that we're talking about, so I hope everybody sticks with us and is eagerly anticipating the ultimate demo. So for agenda, we've already been through introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about the market needs and the challenges, capital budgeting concepts, Project Online and capital budgeting and how they go together, and of course then we're going to demo it and then next steps. So just for starters, and I think everybody is grappling with this, we're seeing the consumerization of technology in the last 10 years lead to a lot of expectations in corporations about how technology should work that are very, very different from even as recently as the early 2000s. Things like ease of use, things like the ability to have things always being updated without going through patch cycles, things like just the basic availability on mobile apps has all become very important and expected, and for the most part systems are keeping up. So one of the areas that is interesting in corporate America and is also kind of being subject to this rise of expectations is the area of capital budgeting, also called annual planning or capital planning. It's a top-line cycle that exists in virtually every company. It's usually conducted at the top levels first, and then it rolls down, but sometimes you see it done kind of horizontally first and then roll up. It's different from project planning in that the expectation is that there is not a ton of detail necessarily underneath the projects or initiatives that are going into the capital budgeting cycle, but there are things like cost categories. So you want to be able to say things like, well, we think travel is going to cost this much, and we think labor is going to cost this much, and we think this amount is going to be CapEx, and we think this amount is going to be OpEx, and we'll talk about that a little bit further in the demo. But the key piece is to say that in effect, it is a different way of planning, and it's not incompatible with project or work breakdown structure based planning. It is an earlier layer that often becomes a project or a set of projects. We have clients that are doing annual planning annually, but we also have clients that are doing this in 5-year increments and even up to 40-year increments. And you don't have a project schedule with a sophisticated WBS, generally speaking, that's running to 40 years, but you are actually, if you are actually running programs and projects of those durations, you do still want to lay out a budget where you can project your spend well into the future. So again, different way of looking at it. It is a type of planning. It is not necessarily the same type of planning that people have conducted in the past. At the same time, it is compatible, and it is something that then has to be reconciled. So the enterprise planning lifecycle, as we often see it at a general level, is to begin, again, at a high level. You go through and you build out some high-level enterprise models, you define your financial and operational targets, then frequently you come down to Project Online. Now, whether you end up immediately creating a detailed plan or whether you don't is up to the process. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, but then again, you validate it against those budgets. Then finally, having kind of gone through that cycle, you analyze the results, finalize changes and approve the plan, and you've worked through your planning cycle. All of this is in one sense before actuals are accumulated, but also concurrent with actuals. Unlike, or I should say like a project schedule that's constantly revised. Every year, companies go through the annual planning process and they lay down a new plan, both taking into account what's already been spent and what is still yet to be spent. Some clients of ours are doing this quarterly. And what they want is a quarterly cycle that then rolls up to match their annual cycle, or even more complex. But the short of it is that this is a process that occurs on a periodic basis that then has to be matched up with the projects, and then of course actuals come in at a later date to demonstrate whether or not the benefits and the spend planned have been realized. So capital budgeting, analysis of potential programs and projects, long-term decisions, very large expenditures, often very important to the organization's future. A lot of times, a lot of smaller efforts will not appear in the capital budget, but they will be under the capital budget in some sense. Again, what we see across our client base is that this is usually a set of spreadsheets or maybe systems that aren't quite built specifically for this purpose. They tend to be disconnected, and it tends to be a huge management effort year after year to pull this data together, and the same effort. So you see people enter into a budget cycle and suddenly the mid-level managers vanish because they are spending hours and hours with spreadsheets and PowerPoints. And of course, what we're suggesting is that there is a better way here, as in the world of the rise of technology, to take advantage of some of what we've seen grow over the last 10 years. Corporate planning solutions. Often you see CapEx being a very important piece. So what is going to be our capital expenditure versus just our operational expenditures? How long are those things going to last? How tightly integrated is this going to be with project and portfolio planning? This is an interesting piece, again, because especially if you're on the starting page with the systems approach, it's almost certain in every company there is already this whole process for budgeting at an annual cycle, and there is probably already, whether it's formal or ad hoc, a project and portfolio planning cycle. It makes sense to approach this from where your company is rather than where you want it to be, and start working toward where you want it to be. But either way, again, important to keep separate. One planning type is different from the other planning type, and that's okay. That's part of the solution that you should be striving for. Capabilities often include applying a standard integrated logical approach to developing, estimating, selecting, proving, monitoring capital investments. The end result is a single source of truth for all these things. And again, not necessarily an unreconciled source of truth, but you know exactly what your top line plan was, and you can compare it exactly to what your project planning is saying today. So starts out with demand management. First of all, pulling together a simple and central way to capture proposed work or investments. You want to be able to accommodate all demand types. You don't want to say, well, we're only doing project work, or we're only doing ticketing work, or we're only doing work that we expect to manage through Agile, for example. You want to be able to say we are going to do this all, because that's the way the budgeting cycle works. No company wants to have hidden budgets. They want to be able to say this is what our planned spend is. You want it to be able to be easily customizable so that people are doing data entry only where and how they expect to do it. And you want it to be able to be sure that it bubbles up the highest priority items, which allows then in return for prioritization. So as you go through the budget cycle, of course, people have a lot of asks, and it's important to be able to say, okay, look, we need to serve this ask as opposed to a different ask. Then, of course, having kind of gone through the initial demand intake, you want to be able to move to both portfolio planning and execution, as well as making sure that you match it up to those budgets. So you want to also, of course, make sure that you don't weigh down your planning with too much detail. So those things that require detail get it, and those things that need to stay at a higher level, you can keep them at a higher level and just look at them as potential areas of spend and investment. Capital budgeting, of course, as we've already talked about, top line, able to kind of go through and make sure that you're matching this up with what you just allocated in your portfolio. Once it's all in place, you do want to be able to reconcile this. I've said this several times already, but it bears repeating, because a lot of times what you'll see is a well-intentioned but misguided drive toward saying this all needs to be one thing. Again, if you think about it, you're going through at an annual level at the start of the year and saying, or at the start of 5 years, we think we're going to spend this much according to these categories. Then your lower level plans are built over the course of a year, and they may or may not match up precisely with what you budgeted. In fact, they probably won't. So they need to be reconciled. And then your actuals will come in. And as your actuals come in, they won't match up with either your project schedule or what you budgeted at the start of the year. The goal is to look at these things and say, okay, are we deviating in a way that requires action and attention, or are we deviating in a way that's normal? Have we incurred more risks or issues? And how can we budget better the following year? So again, it's important as we kind of go through this to recognize that this is a key step in the process. It's not that the budget needs to match right away. It's not the project schedule right away, but in the end, we do need to be able to tie the two back together and say, look, this is how they differed, and this is why. Fundamentally, we are as well with the solution extending project online, which is really important. We are often leveraging what somebody has already invested in. We are leveraging what the team already knows, so we're not dislocating people from what they're used to working with. And it is a common IT platform, of course, because it's built on Office 365. Finally, before we head into the demo, one of the important pieces of this is, as we have kind of, again, moved into the future where people expect technology to serve them and not the other way around, we expect people to work in the environments that they're used to. So for this, as far as this goes, we expect people who are working in Jira to stay working in Jira. We expect people who are working in their ticketing system to stay working in their ticketing system. We expect people who are involved in minor projects and might be leveraging Planner to continue using Planner. But all of this needs to be tied back together at the very top level, again, to the capital budget planning cycle, and then to the extent that project and WBS-based planning is involved, to that piece, and also, again, Agile and ticketing. So with that, Matthew, if you would like to demonstrate some of what I've been talking about, please take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, Scott. Alrighty, so I'm logged in here into Project Online. Project Online is part of the Office 365 set of applications and overall experience, and it works really well automatically with all the different applications that are in here. Just as an example, if I was to upload a document into Project Online, that document would be accessible in OneDrive. If I was to want to report on this, and we'll see this a little later, I can use Power BI, another Office 365 application, to report off of all the great data that's here, so on and so forth. What we're looking at here is a list of all of our different projects, and we can see those projects are in various states, starting out in requested all the way through approved, in progress, so on and so forth. And we can see some high-level health of how these things are doing, overall health, schedule health, work health, even cost health, once we get into actually executing on those projects. I also have a high-level timeline here. But before a project even becomes a project, especially when we're going through this budgeting process, we might want to have an initial location where different capital requests or requests for dollars, projects, programs, whatever it may be, can come into. And so I like to think of this as a funnel. If we start out, we might have 100 different requests, 1,000 different requests, depending on the scope of the groups we're looking at here. But we might have a lot of different requests that are coming in. Many of these we may not ever do, we may not do for a long period of time. So why, cloud up your list of projects with all these different requests that may be very far out or never even get to? Instead, we can put in some basic requests into here. Instead of sending emails, instead of telling people about things in the hallway and things get lost and we don't have one place to go to see all the different requests with some basic information, this can be a place where those requests can get routed into. And so we can see basic information here about how much money are we looking for, what's the estimated ROI, very high level basic things to start with, just based off of, estimates and such that have already been put together. We can load those in just by coming in, filling out a little form. If I was to click on this, we can see that we can format these in a very much executive summary type of format so that we can just see the high level details of what we're looking to do, and even include things like little pictures and such here and see, okay, we're asking for this much capital, this much expense, here's what we're looking to do, here's the business case, so on and so forth, right? From there, I can submit that, and it can go through a basic approval process to say, are we interested in doing more research, putting in more details, building this business case out a little bit more before we actually go through and say, yes, here you go, here's your $500,000 or whatever it might be that you're asking for, right? So that can be the first phase, the first part where we're starting to funnel things down. And then once it gets approved through that phase, that's what can then push it into be a project here in Project Online. But at that point, generally, it would still be a requested project. We're just into the next stage. Now, that's not a required, and none of the things I'm showing today are a required part of the process. We can configure this and set it up to match your process and capture the information you want to capture and so on. It's very, very configurable to allow us to do these different types of things. So what that allows us to do, though, is get out of the spreadsheets, get out of the emails, get out of all these other things, and get into one common format that we can report off of and have some governance around. So once it gets into be a project, a now requested project, I'll go into one of my projects here, like my social networking integration project, and you can see it kicked off a workflow. We're still in the initiating stage. We're waiting for budget approval here. If I scroll down, you'll see we're going to go through many different stages. And so this is a standard PMBOK type flow where we go from initiating to planning, executing, so on and so forth. Again, like most things in the system, this is configurable. So we can have it go through the different phases and stages you want it to go through. And as we go from each phase or stage to the next one, we can send out notifications, we can require approvals by the proper people, and really help put some governance as well as automate the process of getting from start to finish for a new project, program, initiative, whatever it might be that we're asking for budget for. So from there, though, I might assign a project manager or someone who's going to come in and build out this case a little bit more and start to put in some more details before we give it the final approval. And so a way to do that is I can come in, I can select my project, and I'm going to open up a set of capabilities here called OnePlan, which allow us to do some top-down financial planning, as well as resource planning, and I'll show that a little bit because it does tie into the financials from a labor cost perspective. And so we can start to do this planning here on our project and get to more level of detail. One of the things that we're going to add is time phase data here. How much money do I need in this month or this quarter or this year versus next year and the following year, and so on and so forth, towards what Scott was talking about, how these things might span over many different years if they're very large programs and projects. And so what we're looking at here is a high-level resource plan. The only reason I show this is because you can come in, you can build in your high-level resource plans here, and this isn't like a project schedule with 100,000 tasks. This is just saying, I think I'm going to need 3 developers and 2 QAs and a project manager, so on and so forth. You can use either named resources or just generic resources. A lot of times at this point, you would just use generic resources, meaning I don't know that Matthew Willey is going to do the work yet. I just know I need a developer. And you can plan that out using hours or percents or FTEs. And then the cool thing is once you build out your labor plan here, or your resource plan if you want to call it that, once I get to the financial side of things, I don't have to try to go back and recalculate out all of my labor costs here. It will simply just import in. There's an import option here that imports that in and brings in my costs based off of my labor rates that I set up. Generally, you would set up some sort of blended rate structure around these different types of resources and such. And that will pull that in here and automatically build out my labor costs for me, so I don't have to manually try to go and calculate those, right? So that's one piece of the puzzle for my budget that I'm putting together. Beyond that, then I can start to build out my other costs here. So instead of doing this in an Excel spreadsheet, and every single group has their own different Excel spreadsheet, and there's different versions flying around and so on and so forth, I have it all together here in one place in one common format. And I can just start to key in my other costs here. So I have software costs in January of 10,000. I can key that in very much like I would do in an online Excel spreadsheet type of environment. But I have more things I can do. For example, right now I'm planning by month. Maybe your organization doesn't require that level of detail. Maybe I want to plan by quarter or by year. At any time, I can switch here. Like, let's say I want to do it by year, and I want to plan out for the next 3 years. So let's say 2018 to 2020, something like that. I can hit apply, and I can switch up to the yearly level. As I do this, it will actually fill out the months for me. So if I put, $12,000 into a year, it's going to spread that evenly across the 12 months. And so I can switch back and forth between any level at any time, depending on what level of detail I need to and I'm looking to put in for this. Later on in here, I can start to do things like track my forecasts, and that would be done very similarly, but I can actually keep that forecast separate from my budget, so later on then I can compare them to each other and see, is my, as we're getting into the project, is my forecast going up, going down for any particular cost based off of I now have more information. And so we can make sure that that's still staying within the bounds of our budget. And then even later on after that, I might start to track actuals. I can also track benefits in here if I choose to do so. And you can compare these things to each other at any given time. So if I wanted to, for example, compare my budget to my forecasts or to my actuals, I just come in, hit my compare option here. It will then show both, and it makes this nice little heat map so I can see where I have problems. So you can see my forecast here is way over what my budget was for materials and supplies for 2018. So that's a problem, highlights it in red. If you want to show a variance, you can as well, either a value or a percent. So that'll actually show you, what's the difference there? Well, it's $32,000 is what I'm looking at that I'm off. So that gives you kind of a nice, quick, easy interface all in one format that you can come in, key in the information, import in from your resource plan, your labor costs, and really develop that budget, and later on start to track things like forecasts and actuals as well. And this is all configurable too. So you would have specific categories and specific roles and departments and whatever you might want to break these costs out into with your own rates. So this is all configurable through admin pages, settings. No code has to be written to make it so that you can set this up to match the structure of costs that you're looking to track. So from there, we now can then submit that back through that approval that we showed in the workflow earlier, get the final approval based off of all that extra information that I added, and or there's actually a module within Project Online called Portfolio Analysis that if you want to, before you just go and say, yes, I approve, you can utilize this to do some what-if scenarios. So let's say I'm a portfolio manager or a department manager, or maybe we have a steering committee that makes these decisions. This is a nice tool that you can utilize to say, okay, well, we only have so much budget as a whole. We need to figure out which projects we can do within the budget that we have in order to get the most value. And this can be a great way to do that. So in this case, I have a $3 million budget, let's say, for this portfolio or department or group or whatever I'm looking at here. And if I have $3 million, what it's telling me is I should do these projects, not these unselected projects down there. That's going to get me 76% of the value, total benefits of $7.17 million, estimated benefits. And I can look at ROI, and I can include in these views here any other financial metrics that I might want, like NPV or IRR or whatever else you might be tracking and utilizing to try to make these decisions. And this is based off of, you have to set some values around these too. I have to be able to define what the value is of these projects. And that is configurable as well, so that can be more financially driven, or it can be more just value driven. We want to improve customer satisfaction scores. We want to drive quality of our products, whatever it might be. We can use different, what they call business drivers. That generates our priorities here. And then we can utilize that to try to make some more objective decisions instead of, I just want to do this project because it looks pretty. I want to do this project because it's going to give me more value comparatively to the cost. But then I can go, well, what if we need and want to do more projects? I can up my budget and go, well, what if I had $5 million? If I have $5 million, notice it moved in some more projects here. and that unselected projects list is getting smaller. And now, by adding $2 million, I can get 85% of the value of all these projects. My benefits go up to $11.2 million. And you can see a chart here, a graph showing as you add more money, you get more value, but at some point that starts to taper off. So you generally want to be somewhere around here, you know, to get the most bang for your buck, so to say. And there's lots of other bells and whistles in here, and I won't go into all of them today, but it's a nice objective way to at least give you more information around, you know, how you could possibly optimize your portfolio. From there, you always have the, you know, ultimate power. You can always move something out if you absolutely don't want to do it, force it out, or force something in if you absolutely have to do it because it's a government compliance, whatever it might be. You commit your scenario, and then that kind of moves it to the next phase of your process, saying, yep, here we go, here are the things we want to do, and here's when we want to do them. There's a resource piece to this as well, where you can then go and plan resources as well before you go and do that. So that can be a nice way to optimize your portfolio and select the right projects that are going to give you the most value. So from there, as we go through the process, you know, new requests are coming in. We're then going to build out more details around them. We can use the portfolio analysis if we want, or just go through that workflow process of approvals. And all along, we can create different reports, pre-built reports that are templatized. These are reports we can start from, but we can tweak these to your needs if there's different ways you want to look at things. I'll show a few examples here today. But as we're going through this whole process, we can try to look up that information more objectively and get visibility into what's going on. So this particular one here, for example, is breaking out the costs here by portfolio and then by project and then into the different cost categories, labor, equipment, software, you know, so on and so forth. And you can see things like budgets versus forecasts versus actuals as those all start to come in. Excuse me. And that's, you know, one way to look at things. I can also see breakouts by capital and operational expenses if that's something that is of interest. We have the ability to kind of break those out. I can also just do high-level summary. So this is a list of all of my different projects that I have going on, initiatives and such, the budget versus the actual cost, what's remaining, benefits, ROI, you know, so on and so forth. And I can come in and start to filter these things down. I just want to look at my portfolio of cost-cutting projects and see what that looks like. Or maybe I want to go by project type. I just want to see all of my agile projects if I wanted to do so, you know, something like that, you know, so on and so forth. So you can come in, filter those down, and start to look at it, you know, in different ways. Maybe you want to look at costs over time. As we showed, we can do time-phased costs. So I can show things like budgets versus actual costs over time to make sure over any particular period of time we're not having spikes. You know, our burn isn't too quick, and therefore it looks like we may be off track when we get to the end of the project. So we can keep track of those things as well. So that's more from a portfolio status perspective, looking across lots of projects and understanding the costs of those different ones and how those add up and such. There's a whole report pack that's just dedicated specifically around costs and financials, you know, and doesn't have any of the other kind of details around as well that you might want for other purposes. And so, for example, this one here is showing my budget versus my actual costs versus my benefits is this black line here, but we could put forecast in here and pull out benefits if you weren't tracking those. These are easily tweakable. But it's showing that, and it's grouped up here by portfolio. So I can see from my cut cost portfolio, here's how we look from all those different aspects. But with many of the reports in here, you can drill in. So if I click on the cut cost portfolio, it will then drill in, and it will show me the individual projects within that portfolio and where those costs are actually coming from. You can see what phones, for example, has the biggest budget out of all the projects that are part of that portfolio. And so we can kind of drill into multiple levels of details if we choose to do so. If you're looking for more traditional kind of Excel type pivot chart looking reports, we have those built into this as well by default. So this one's by portfolio, and it's showing costs broken out by quarter and then totaled up by year. The next one here is basically the same thing, except for it's looking at it showing all the projects costs broken out by quarter and then totaled up by year. The next one, same again, but cost versus actual cost. So I want to compare basically my budget versus my actuals by quarter and then total it up by year for each of my different projects. And then the last tab here is actually really interesting. Power BI has some predictive analytics capabilities built into it. What that really means is we can predict what's going to happen in the future based off of current data. And as you give it more data, so a longer period of time where you're using this and giving it more data, it can make better predictions. Here I don't have a ton of data, but you can see here my actual costs over time. And this little dashed line is just a trend line showing me where I'm trending. But from this point on here, this gray area, that's actually a prediction area where it's predicting the costs based off of what's there. And you can put in your confidence intervals. So I could say I want to be 95% sure I know where my costs are going to be, say, going into the next year. But notice as it gets farther out, this guy gets a little bit bigger. It's harder and harder to predict where it's going to be. So there's a high, a low, and a middle here that we can see where these costs are going to be. As you give it more data, it will start to even recognize things like cyclical trends. It knows that more costs happen in this particular time period, so on and so forth. And so this prediction here will get jagged as well and start to give you a better idea of where things are going to be. That's kind of a cool way to help do some predictions and or forecasts past where you even have any actual data. So you can see there's a lot of different ways you can report off of this. These are just some specific examples, and it's very configurable. We see that many different customers have the same kind of need. There's a need to approve budget for different projects, initiatives, programs, and such. And we see that that happens in many different ways. This can help consolidate together, put some governance around it, and give visibility into it without having to do lots of manual steps and having a lot of overhead from just trying to manage the process perspective. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Scott for just another slide or so, and then we'll let you guys go for the day. So here you go, Scott.
All right, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate it. So in the end, what we're looking for, of course, is a centralized view of everything that's going on. Maybe split into portfolios, maybe broken into departments. It doesn't really matter. We are looking to be able to, having gathered all that information into one place, actually apply advanced analytics to it. We're hoping to, of course, then manage our budget and our financials in one place, keep everybody in the know, and be able to report on the portfolio status at any one time. And again, all of this, the intention is to make sure that planning of one type doesn't have to be folded into planning of another type. Work management of one type doesn't have to be folded into another type. But in the end, we do want to be able to provide a central place for everything to be subject to analysis and reporting. So that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to learn more, you can go, of course, to our website, www.wicrosoft.com, or you can email Mike directly at motronto@wicrosoft.com. Thank you very much.